In 1821, a man died thousands of miles away from Europe, living his final days in a modest stone house, trapped on a tiny wind-battered rock in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean. Less than 2 decades earlier, that exact same man had placed an imperial crown on his own head, rewritten the laws of an entire nation, and controlled the fate of almost every country on the European continent. His rise required a very specific type of environment. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted, ending centuries of absolute monarchy and plunging the country into years of political purges, street violence, and multi-front wars against neighboring kingdoms. The old hierarchies of wealth and royal blood were entirely stripped away, leaving a massive, bloody vacuum of power at the center of the state. The revolution had shattered the traditional rules of promotion. In this desperate, highly volatile environment, the state no longer cared about a soldier's pedigree. They only cared about who could win. Napoleon Bonaparte was born in 1769 to a family of minor nobility on the Mediterranean island of Corsica, barely a year after France annexed it. Sent to a military academy on the mainland, his heavy accent and modest background made him an isolated target for the wealthier French cadets. He poured his energy into studying mathematics and the mechanics of artillery. While other officers romanticized cavalry charges and infantry lines, Napoleon viewed the battlefield as an equation to be solved, with angles, velocity, and concentrated firepower. That calculation paid off in 1793 at the Siege of Toulon. He positioned his artillery batteries with such precise tactical leverage that he drove British and Royalist forces out of the coastal city entirely. The revolutionary government promoted him to general. He was 24 years old. Given command of the French forces in Italy in 1796, he struck at the established Austrian armies with ferocious speed. He moved his troops faster than conventional military doctrine allowed, improvising on the march and dismantling larger, better supplied forces one by one. He followed this up with a visually stunning, deeply ambitious campaign through Egypt. Though militarily unsuccessful in the end, the imagery of French troops marching past the pyramids painted him in the public imagination as a figure of historical destiny. By leveraging his high-profile victories and framing his Egyptian expedition as a grand cultural mission, he outshone the campaign's logistical failures. He returned to a France in desperate need of a hero, appearing as the only figure capable of imposing order on a failing republic. In November 1799, Napoleon capitalized on the public's exhaustion with the weak revolutionary government. He participated in a swift military coup, and within weeks, a new constitution named him First Consul. At 30 years old, he had taken control of France. He immediately set to work rebuilding the state's foundation. He centralized the chaotic administrative departments, stabilized the ruined national currency, and oversaw the implementation of the metric system to unify French measurement and simplify trade. This volume represents his most sweeping administrative effort, the Napoleonic Code. It mandated equality, secularized courts, and protected property rights. He replaced a confusing patchwork of medieval regulations with a unified legal framework applying identically from Paris to the provinces. In 1804, at a lavish ceremony in Notre Dame Cathedral, he made his authority absolute. With the Pope nearby, Napoleon lifted the crown from the altar and placed it onto his own head, officially declaring himself Emperor of the French. He did not bow to the church, and he did not claim a royal bloodline. The act of crowning himself broadcast a very specific message. His authority was derived entirely from his own calculated ambition. Look at how he managed the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805. Facing a combined Russian and Austrian army nearly twice the size of his own, he deliberately thinned out his right flank. When the overconfident Allied army moved to crush it, Napoleon launched a devastating strike straight through their suddenly weakened center, splitting and destroying their forces. Following Austerlitz, French armies rapidly tore through the continent. Over the next 2 years, Napoleon crushed coalition after coalition, bringing Prussia, Austria, and eventually Russia to the negotiating table on his terms. He completely dismantled the 1,000-year-old Holy Roman Empire. He carved up borders to create new client states, deposed ancient monarchs, and aggressively placed his own brothers and sisters on thrones from Spain to Naples. By 1807, His military speed and administrative ruthlessness had created a unique political reality. One man, born on the fringes of the country, now effectively dictated the laws and borders of nearly the entire European continent. But his absolute control demanded perfect compliance, and Spain refused to give it. When Napoleon forced his brother onto the Spanish throne, the local population launched a massive, brutal guerrilla insurgency. This Spanish ulcer tied down hundreds of thousands of French soldiers in an agonizing war. In 1812, Napoleon marched 600,000 men across this border, but the Russian army retreated deep into this vast interior, burning crops and destroying supplies. Reaching Moscow, the French found only a burning, evacuated city. There was no enemy to fight and no treaty to sign. With winter closing in, Napoleon ordered a retreat. Temperatures plummeted far below freezing. Starving and relentlessly harassed by Russian cavalry, the Grand Army completely fell apart in the snow. Of the 600,000 men who marched in, a fraction made it out. Napoleon had built his career on precise calculations of troop movements and artillery angles on defined battlefields. He lost his army because he applied that same logic to an empire with endless geography and a winter that could not be outmaneuvered. The illusion of French invincibility was broken. Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria immediately formed a new coalition, driving Napoleon's depleted armies back into France. In 1814, they captured Paris, forced Napoleon to abdicate, and exiled him to the small Mediterranean island of Elba. Less than a year later, he slipped past his guards and landed back on the French coast. The royal troops sent to arrest him instead openly wept and rallied to his side. He marched into Paris and reclaimed his throne without firing a single shot, kicking off a frantic period known as the 100 Days. It ended on June 18, 1815, in the heavy mud of Waterloo. Napoleon threw his cavalry at the British infantry squares for hours, without breaking their lines. When tens of thousands of Prussian reinforcements arrived on the French flank late in the afternoon, the Imperial Army finally collapsed in the rain. He had gambled that Europe was too exhausted for another war. He was wrong. The Allied nations had finally learned to synchronize their forces entirely to ensure he could never hold power again. He surrendered to the British and was banished to St. Helena, a sheer rock in the South Atlantic guarded by warships. He spent his final 6 years dictating his memoirs before dying of stomach cancer at the age of 51. Yet the systems he built survived the destruction of his armies. The metric system he implemented to unify French commerce eventually became the global standard for measurement, while his model of a centralized government became the operational blueprint for the modern nation-state. The Napoleonic Code remained embedded in the legal DNA of Europe. Today, versions of that exact civil framework still govern property rights and equality before the law in dozens of countries around the globe. The warlord ultimately destroyed himself by pushing an army into a Russian winter he could not control, but the architect succeeded. By tearing down medieval laws and centralizing authority, he laid the concrete foundations that the modern Western world still operates on today.